The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom shimmered on a gala night, but beneath the glittering crystals, dark secrets were about to emerge. Sarah Anderson thought the night would mark the beginning of her new life, but an unexpected revelation would make her question everything. What happened that night would change her story forever. The Grand Plaza Hotel ballroom sparkled with the glow of thousands of crystals hanging from the ceiling, reflecting the golden light of the chandeliers in a hypnotic spectacle. It was the night of the year's big event, a gala ball that brought together the cream of society, and at the center of all attention was Sarah Anderson, radiant in her champagne silk dress. Her long dark brown hair was elegantly tied in an elaborate bun, with a few loose strands framing her delicate face. She smiled, as she had been taught to do since childhood, but her honey-colored eyes held an uneasiness that few noticed. At her side, Luke Sullivan displayed his usual confident smile. Tall, athletic, with his perfectly aligned black hair and wearing an impeccable tuxedo, he was the very personification of success. At 35, he had built an impressive empire, and his magnetic presence naturally drew all eyes to him. Luke led Sarah through the ballroom with the ease of someone accustomed to being the center of attention, greeting important guests and exchanging appropriately calculated comments. "Darling, you look absolutely stunning tonight," Luke whispered in Sarah's ear as they crossed the ballroom. His tone was soft, but there was something different in his voice, a note that Sarah couldn't fully decipher. She responded with a polite smile, feeling the weight of the engagement ring on her finger, a spectacular piece with a 5-carat diamond that seemed more a symbol of possession than love. William Anderson, Sarah's father, observed the couple from a corner of the ballroom, holding a champagne flute with unnecessary force. His face appeared serene, but those who knew him well could notice the tension in his broad shoulders. A real estate tycoon, William had built his fortune with iron determination, and some questionable decisions he preferred to keep in the shadows. His only daughter's marriage to Luke Sullivan was more than a romantic union. It was the consolidation of a carefully architected business alliance. "William, darling, you look worried," commented Emily, his wife, approaching with the elegance of a society lady. She wore an emerald green dress that accentuated her light eyes, so similar to her daughter's. Emily carried her own secrets, a past that intertwined with the Sullivan family in ways she preferred to bury deep in her memory. "Everything is perfectly fine, my dear," William replied, but his gaze didn't leave the couple circulating through the ballroom. He knew that night would be decisive, but not in the way everyone expected. At another point in the ballroom, a woman observed the scene with particular interest. Isabella Costa, stunning in a red dress that hugged her curves provocatively, kept herself discreetly away from the spotlight for now. Her dark eyes followed Luke's every move with the intensity of someone who knows someone's secrets deeply. She checked her delicate wristwatch. It was almost time for the moment that would change everything. Sarah noticed a different movement among the waiters. They began distributing champagne flutes to all guests, a sign that the moment for the official speech was approaching. Her heart accelerated slightly. This would be the moment when Luke would officially announce the wedding date, an event that society magazines were already anticipating as the event of the decade. "Ladies and gentlemen," Luke's voice echoed through the ballroom's sound system, causing all conversations to gradually cease. He had climbed onto the small stage set up especially for the occasion, and his presence commanded the attention of all present. "It is with immense satisfaction that I welcome you on this special night." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. Something in Luke's tone of voice sounded different from usual. She knew him well enough to notice that there was a note of irony in his words, something that only someone very close could notice. "As you all know, tonight is dedicated to celebrating love," Luke continued, his gaze sweeping the room with the precision of a predator. "Love in all its forms, with all its surprises and revelations." William Anderson took a step forward, unconsciously. Emily held his arm tightly, her perfectly manicured nails digging slightly into the fabric of her husband's jacket. Both felt that something was about to happen. "Sarah," Luke turned his gaze to her, who remained standing near the stage, "you have been the perfect bride, the companion everyone expected you to be. Your family, He paused significantly, looking at William. "And Emily has been extremely generous in their support of our relationship." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. Luke's words, seemingly complimentary, carried a weight that made all those present hold their breath, as if sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. "However," Luke continued, his smile gradually increasing, "life presents us with unexpected paths, and sometimes we need to be honest about our true feelings." It was at this moment that Isabella began to move towards the stage, her decisive steps echoing on the marble floor of the ballroom. Sarah felt her world begin to spin when she saw the woman in red approach, but she held firm, years of refined education preventing her from showing any sign of weakness. "I would like to introduce everyone to Isabella Costa," Luke announced, extending his hand to help her onto the stage. "The woman who truly captured my heart." The murmur that ran through the ballroom was like a wave, starting low and gradually growing until it became an uncontrollable buzz. Cell phone cameras began to record the moment, and Sarah could feel the flashes firing in her direction, capturing every second of her public humiliation. Isabella smiled at the audience, her posture exuding confidence and satisfaction. Luke embraced her by the waist, an intimate gesture that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. "I know this may seem shocking to some," he continued, his voice now carrying a tone of challenge, "but I believe that honesty is always the best path." Sarah remained motionless, her face a mask of composure that hid the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to consume her. Her eyes met her mother's in the crowd, and for a brief moment something passed between them, a silent understanding, an untold story that seemed about to emerge from the shadows of the past. William Anderson took a step towards the stage, but was stopped by Emily. "Not yet," she whispered urgently. "It's not the right moment." The air in the ballroom had become heavy, charged with the weight of secrets about to be revealed. Luke continued his speech, each word carefully chosen to maximize the impact of his public betrayal. But what no one realized was that behind the facade of a humiliated victim, Sarah's mind was beginning to work, connecting dots that before seemed disconnected. That night, which should have been the pinnacle of a society fairy tale, was turning into the first chapter of a much more complex story. A story of power, betrayal, and family secrets that spanned generations. And Sarah, against all expectations, was about to discover that her role in this plot was much greater than she could have ever imagined. The morning sun streamed through the huge windows of the penthouse apartment where Sarah had taken refuge after the scandal of the previous night. Sitting in her favorite armchair, still wearing the silk robe she had put on upon arrival, she watched the city awaken while her mind relived every moment of the event. Social media was exploding with videos and photos of the public humiliation she had suffered, but she kept her cell phone turned off, creating a temporary bubble of silence around her. The soft sound of the doorbell broke her contemplation. Through the peephole, Sarah saw her mother, Emily, standing in the hallway. She hesitated for a moment before opening the door. There was something about her parents' behavior the night before that intrigued her deeply. "Sweetie," Emily entered hurriedly, carrying an old leather folder under her arm. Her usually serene eyes showed unusual restlessness. "We need to talk, and it needs to be now, before your father finds out I came here." Sarah observed her mother curiously. Emily had always been the personification of elegance and control, but that morning there was something different in her posture. She seemed simultaneously determined and apprehensive, as if she were about to do something she had long postponed. "Why can't Dad know you're here?" Sarah questioned, serving 2 cups of the tea she had just prepared. The aroma of chamomile filled the room, contrasting with the tension that hung in the air. Emily placed the folder on the coffee table and took a deep breath before starting. "Because what I'm going to tell you now will change everything you think you know about our family. And about Luke." His name made Sarah shudder involuntarily. "Mum, after last night, I don't know if I want to hear anything more about Luke Sullivan." "But you need to," Emily insisted, opening the folder and revealing old photographs and documents yellowed by time. "Because what happened yesterday wasn't just about you and Luke. It was the beginning of something that was destined to happen. A long time ago. With trembling fingers, Emily picked up one photograph in particular. In it, a younger version of herself smiled, next to a man Sarah immediately recognized. It was Anthony Sullivan, Luke's father, in his youth years. The closeness between them in the photo was too evident to be ignored. "You and Luke's father," Sarah whispered, her words laden with gradual understanding. "Yes," Emily confirmed, her voice low but firm. "Anthony and I loved each other deeply. It was a long time ago before I met your father, but our relationship was destroyed by circumstances beyond our control." Sarah picked up other photographs from the folder, discovering more moments frozen in time. Her mother and Anthony on different occasions, always close, always with looks that said more than words could express. "But what does this have to do with what happened yesterday?" Sarah asked, trying to connect the pieces of the puzzle forming before her. Emily picked up a yellowed envelope and took out a series of old documents. "Anthony and I weren't just lovers. We were partners in a project that could have revolutionized the real estate market at the time. We had plans, dreams, and your father, William, was our main investor." Sarah's hands trembled as she took the documents. They were contracts, partnership agreements, architectural projects of impressive magnitude. "Project Horizon," she read, aloud the title of one of the documents. "Exactly," Emily confirmed. "It was more than a real estate development. It was a completely new vision of sustainable urban development, something that was decades ahead of its time." "What happened?" Sarah asked, although something inside her already anticipated that the answer would not be pleasant. Emily stood, up, walking to the window. The sun was now higher in the sky, bathing the city in a golden light that seemed ironically bright for such a somber conversation. "Your father happened. William saw an opportunity to take control of the project. He used his contacts, his influence. He managed to get some important investors to withdraw, created problems with environmental licenses, spread rumors about the financial viability of the project." Sarah felt her stomach churn. The image she had of her father, always so strong and upright, was beginning to fragment before her eyes. And then, Anthony lost everything. The project, his reputation, his investments, and I was placed in an impossible position. Emily turned to her daughter, tears shining in her eyes. "William threatened to destroy not only Anthony, but the entire Sullivan family if I didn't marry him. He knew exactly how to use his power and influence." "You married Dad to protect Luke's father?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I married your father because I had no choice. Anthony never forgave me for it, even understanding my reasons. He moved abroad soon after, married Luke's mother, but—" Emily paused, as if the next words were particularly painful. "The resentment, the bitterness, all of it was passed on to Luke. He grew up hearing stories about how the Andersons had destroyed his family." Sarah stood up abruptly, her legs wobbly. "So my engagement to Luke all this time, it was his revenge," Emily completed softly. "Luke planned everything meticulously. He approached you, gained William's trust through seemingly advantageous deals, created an image of the perfect son-in-law, all to be able to destroy our family in the same way he believes we destroyed his." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah walked to her bar and poured herself a shot of whiskey, something she rarely did, especially at that hour of the morning. Her mind worked frantically, processing all the implications of that revelation. "But there's more," Emily continued, taking out more documents from the folder. "Project Horizon never really ended. William just archived it, waiting for the right moment to resurrect it. And now with the planned merger between Anderson and Sullivan companies that would come with your marriage, he planned to use the original project, didn't he?" Sarah completed, beginning to understand the magnitude of the situation. "Use the ideas that you and Anthony developed." "Exactly. And Luke discovered this. The public humiliation you suffered yesterday was just the first move in a much bigger game. He doesn't just want to destroy your heart, Sarah. He wants to destroy everything your father built, using the very weapons that William used in the past." Sarah walked to her desk and turned on her laptop. Notifications began to flash instantly. Dozens of messages, emails, social media alerts. But she ignored them, opening her browser instead and starting to research Project Horizon. "What are you doing?" Emily asked, approaching. "Discovering the truth," Sarah replied, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "If Luke wants to play, let's play. But this time, I'll establish my own rules." Emily watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. "Be careful, Sarah. You're dealing with decades of resentment and secrets. People can get hurt." "People are already hurt, Mom," Sarah replied, without taking her eyes off the screen. "The difference is that now, I'm going to find out exactly why, and more importantly, I'm going to find out what Luke is really planning." The sound of a notification interrupted her concentration. It was a message from an unknown number. "Ms. Anderson, we need to talk. I have information about Project Horizon that may be of interest to you. Isabella Costa." Sarah felt her heart race. The woman who had been the instrument of her public humiliation was now offering information. Was it another trap from Luke, or did Isabella have her own motivations for making contact? "What are you going to do?" Emily asked, noticing her daughter's thoughtful expression. Sarah reread the message once more before answering. "I'm going to find out exactly what's going on, and this time, I won't be just a piece on anyone's board." The Belvedere Cafe, with its wide windows and Art Deco decor, seemed strangely suitable for a meeting that could change the course of everything. Sarah arrived 15 minutes before the scheduled time, choosing a discreet table in the back of the establishment. She wore a navy blue tailored suit and dark sunglasses in an attempt to go unnoticed after days of unwanted media exposure. Punctually at 3 in the afternoon, Isabella Costa crossed the doors of the cafe. Unlike the exuberant woman in the red dress from the night of the event, she now presented a more sober, almost professional appearance, in a beige skirt and blazer set. Her heels echoed on the wooden floor as she approached Sarah's table. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," Isabella said, sitting down. Her voice carried a different tone than Sarah expected. There was no arrogance or mockery, just a pragmatic seriousness. "You have 1 minute to convince me that this isn't another of Luke's setups," Sarah replied, keeping her sunglasses in place, like a barrier between her and the woman who had been the instrument of her public humiliation. Isabella opened her briefcase and took out a series of documents, placing them on the table. "I'm not who you think I am," she began, pushing the papers towards Sarah. "Actually, I'm a private investigator. I was hired 6 months ago to investigate Luke Sullivan's activities." Sarah slowly removed her glasses, her eyes fixed on the documents before her. They were detailed reports, surveillance photographs, transcripts of conversations. "Who hired you?" "Anthony Sullivan," Isabella revealed, watching Sarah's reaction closely. "Luke's father." The information hit Sarah like a punch in the stomach. Luke's father, the man her mother had loved in the past, was investigating his own son? Why? "Because Anthony discovered that Luke was using family company resources for personal purposes," Isabella explained, pointing to one of the reports. "But as the investigation progressed, we discovered something much bigger. Luke wasn't just diverting money, he was recreating Project Horizon." Sarah flipped through the documents with growing interest. There were architectural plans, feasibility studies, financial projections, all related to the project her mother and Anthony had conceived decades ago. "He's trying to realize the original project?" "Not exactly," Isabella replied, leaning forward. "He's using the basic structure of the project, but with significant modifications. Modifications that would make the venture much more profitable, but completely against the principles of sustainability and social development that were at the heart of the original project." A waiter approached to take their orders. Sarah requested a double espresso. She would need the caffeine to process all that information. Isabella ordered a green tea. "Why the staging at the event?" Sarah asked as soon as the waiter walked away. "Why humiliate me publicly if you were investigating Luke?" "Because we needed him to let his guard down," Isabella explained. "Luke is extremely cautious, but he has a weak point, his ego. Anthony knew that if he could achieve a public triumph over the Almeida family, he would become less vigilant. It was the only way we could access crucial information." Sarah felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. "So I was used as bait, without my knowledge or consent?" "Anthony tried to protect you," Isabella argued, her voice softening. He tried to warn your mother several times over the past few months, but Edward intercepted all attempts at communication. When it became clear that Luke was planning to use you to get to your father, Anthony realized he needed to act quickly. The waiter returned with their drinks, providing a moment's pause in the tense conversation. Sarah took advantage of it to organize her thoughts, taking a sip of the hot coffee. What exactly is Luke planning? She finally asked. Isabella pulled out another document from her folder. He's created a complex structure of shell companies. When the wedding happened, and the merger between Almeida and Sequeira companies was completed, he would use these companies to drain the project's resources. Your father would lose everything, just as Anthony lost in the past. And you have proof of this? I have enough evidence to start a serious investigation, Isabella confirmed, but we need more, and that's where you come in. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Luke still doesn't know he's been discovered. He believes his plan is working perfectly, that he managed to humiliate you and that he can now proceed with the next phase of his revenge. But if you... Isabella paused significantly. If you pretend that you want a reconciliation, we could access information that we still lack. You want me to pretend I forgive him? Sarah asked incredulously. After everything he did? I want you to do what he did to you, Isabella responded directly. Use his ego against himself. Luke believes he's untouchable, that no one can outdo him at his own game. That's his greatest weakness. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind working quickly. It was a bold proposal, potentially dangerous, but it also offered a chance for revenge that she hadn't considered possible. And my father, she asked, how does he fit into all this? Edward Almeida is not innocent in this story, Isabella answered cautiously. His actions in the past triggered much of what's happening now. But if we don't act quickly, Luke will destroy not just your father, but the entire legacy that your mother and Anthony tried to build with the original Horizon project. Sarah's phone vibrated. It was a message from Luke. Her heart raced as she read, I miss you, can we talk? I have a lot to explain. Isabella observed Sarah's reaction. He's already making his move. The question is, are you ready to make yours? Sarah reread Luke's message, then looked again at the document spread out on the table. Years of lies, manipulations, and betrayals had led to this moment. Her mother had been forced to give up her love to protect Anthony. Her father had used his power to destroy dreams. Luke had turned everything into an elaborate revenge plan. What exactly do you need me to do? Sarah finally asked, her voice firm and determined. A small smile appeared on Isabella's lips as she opened her laptop. First, we need to establish your new public identity. The woman devastated by betrayal who, after reflection, decides to give love a second chance. It will be a delicate performance. We need it to be convincing not just for Luke, but for all the media following the case. And then? Isabella quickly typed a password, opening a folder of encrypted files. We begin the real operation. Anthony is organizing a secret meeting in Geneva next week. We need you to be there, but Luke can't suspect anything until the right moment. Sarah picked up her phone and began typing a response to Luke. I miss you too, maybe we could have dinner and talk. When she looked up from the phone, she found Isabella watching her with approval. Very good, the investigator commented. Now, let's establish some basic rules for secure communication. From now on, every word, every gesture, every encounter needs to be carefully planned. Outside the cafe, the city continued its frantic pace, oblivious to the fact that at that discreet table, an unexpected alliance was being formed. An alliance that could not only expose long-buried truths, but also redefine the fate of two of the country's most powerful families. The LeBlanc restaurant shimmered under the soft light of early evening. Sarah adjusted the black dress she had carefully chosen for the occasion, elegant but not too elaborate, conveying exactly the message she needed, a hurt woman, but willing to listen to explanations. Her heart was racing, not from the anxiety of seeing Luke again, but from the awareness of the role she needed to play. You look stunning, Luke's voice sounded behind her as she was led to the reserved table. He maintained that characteristic smile, a mixture of charm and confidence that now, in Sarah's eyes, seemed more like a well-crafted mask. "Thank you for receiving me," she replied, allowing her voice to tremble slightly. A calculated performance, following Isabella's guidance. "Dosa, I confess I was surprised by your invitation." Luke pulled out the chair for her to sit, a gesture of chivalry that would have charmed her before. "I needed to see you, Sarah. Explain everything that happened." A sommelier approached with the wine list, and Luke chose a special vintage Bordeaux red. Sarah observed his precise movements, thinking about how each of his gestures now seemed part of an elaborate staging. "Explain?" she asked, keeping her eyes lowered, nervously playing with the linen napkin. "How do you explain a public humiliation of that level, Luke?" He leaned forward, his dark eyes fixed on hers. "It was a mistake, Sarah. A terrible mistake. So motivated by circumstances you don't know about." "What circumstances could justify something like that?" she asked, allowing a touch of bitterness to escape in her voice. "Your father," Luke began, pausing when the sommelier returned with the wine. He waited for the glasses to be served and for them to be alone again before continuing. "Edward Almeida is not the man you think you know." Sarah took a small sip of wine, using the moment to compose herself. "What does my father have to do with your decision to humiliate me publicly?" "Everything," Luke replied, his voice lowering to almost a whisper. "Your father destroyed my family years ago. What happened at the event was a way of showing him that he can't control everything and everyone around him. So I was just an instrument of revenge?" she asked, allowing tears to form in her eyes, another tactic suggested by Isabella. Luke reached across the table, lightly touching her fingers. "At first, maybe. But Sarah, you need to understand what we developed, what we built together. It became real for me." The waiter approached to take their orders. Sarah chose a grilled fish while Luke opted for the filet mignon. When they were alone again, he continued. "Isabel was a mistake, a distraction I used to try to convince myself that I could go ahead with my original plan. But I can no longer deny what I feel for you." Sarah gently withdrew her hand from his. "How can I believe you now? How can I be sure this isn't just another manipulation?" "Let me prove it," he replied, his eyes shining with an intensity that almost made her doubt everything she had discovered. "I have a trip scheduled to Geneva next week. Come with me. We can start over away from all this madness, away from your father's influence." It took all of Sarah's self-control not to show her surprise. So Luke would be in Geneva too. This couldn't be a coincidence. "Geneva?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. "Why Geneva?" "I have some important meetings there," he answered vaguely. "But the most important thing is that we can have time together, away from everything and everyone. Time to rebuild what we had." The dinner proceeded between seemingly sincere conversations and moments of loaded silence. Luke talked about his feelings, about regret, about second chances. Sarah played her role perfectly, the hurt but still in love woman, fighting against her better judgment. When dessert arrived, an elaborate chocolate pavé, Luke made his final move. "What do you say, Sarah? Come with me to Geneva. We can leave on Tuesday." She hesitated for exactly the time Isabella had recommended. Not too long, to avoid seeming artificial, but long enough to be convincing. "I need to think, Luke. All of this is way too intense." "Of course," he smiled understandingly. "Take your time, but not too much. I need to confirm the tickets by tomorrow night." After Luke dropped her off at the hotel, Sarah immediately sent a coded message to Isabella, using the system they had established. "The bird is ready to fly, destination confirmed for Tuesday." The response came almost instantly. "Excellent. Meeting in 30 minutes at the agreed location." Sarah quickly changed clothes, opting for something discreet and comfortable. Her heart was still racing from the adrenaline of the dinner, from the tension of maintaining her convincing performance for hours. The agreed location was a small 24-hour cafe in the basement of a commercial building. When Sarah arrived, Isabella was already there, accompanied by a man she immediately recognized from her mother's old photos, Anthony Siqueira. "Miss Almeida," Anthony stood up to greet her. His voice was surprisingly soft for a man of his stature. "I appreciate your courage in participating in this delicate project." Sarah studied the man her mother had loved so many years ago. The grey hair and lines on his face couldn't completely hide the beauty he must have possessed in his youth. His eyes, so similar to Luke's, carried a sadness that seemed permanent. "I'm not doing this just for you," Sarah responded honestly. "I need to know the truth about everything." "And you will," Anthony assured, gesturing for her to sit down. "But first, we need to discuss exactly how to proceed in Geneva. Luke can't suspect that we know about his plans." Isabella opened her laptop, revealing a series of documents and architectural plans. "The meeting is scheduled for Wednesday at the Helvetia Bank office. Luke believes he's going to a meeting with potential investors for the modified project." "And isn't he?" Sarah asked. "Oh, there will be investors there," Anthony smiled slightly, "but not the ones Luke expects to meet. We managed to convince some of the original Horizon Project investors to participate. People who lost a lot of money when your father, Edward, sabotaged the project years ago. And what exactly is my role in all of this?" Isabella leaned forward. "You, Sarah, will be our wild card. Luke believes he's manipulating you for his own ends, but in reality, Anthony completed, you will be the catalyst that will make his entire plan crumble." The Almeida mansion never seemed so imposing, and at the same time so suffocating to Sarah as on that morning. She crossed the impeccably maintained garden, knowing that the conversation she would have with her father would be one of the most difficult of her life. Edward Almeida was in his office, as always on Sunday mornings, reviewing documents and planning his next week. "Dad," Sarah called softly, standing at the office door. Edward looked up from the papers, and for a moment she saw something different. In his gaze, concern, perhaps even fear. "Come in, dear," he replied, removing his reading glasses. "I was actually needing to talk to you." Sarah sat in the leather armchair in front of the majestic desk, feeling the weight of the documents she carried in her bag. Documents that Isabella and Anthony had provided her, evidence of her father's manipulations in the past. "I heard you had dinner with Luke last night," Edward began, his voice controlled but tense. "I hope you're not considering—" "Actually, I am," Sarah interrupted, keeping her voice firm. "Luke invited me to go to Geneva with him next week, and I accepted." Edward stood up abruptly, his normally controlled face showing sudden anger. "Have you lost your mind? After what he did? The public humiliation?" "It's funny you talk about public humiliation, Dad," Sarah replied, pulling the documents from her bag, "especially considering your history with the Sekira family." Edward's face paled slightly as he recognized some of the papers she began to spread on his desk. "Where did you get this? Does it matter? What matters is that I now know the truth about the Horizon Project, about Anthony Sekira, about Mom." Edward sat back down, running his hand through his grey hair in a rare gesture of nervousness. "Your mother told you, didn't she? Marcella never knew how to keep secrets properly." "She told me because it was the right thing to do," Sarah replied. "Something you apparently never considered important." "You don't understand," Edward argued, his voice taking on a defensive tone. "Business is complex, Sarah. Sometimes difficult decisions need to be made." "Difficult decisions?" she repeated, her voice laden with disbelief. "You destroyed the dream of two people, forced Mom into a marriage she didn't want, and you call that difficult decisions?" Edward stood up again, walking to the window overlooking the garden. For a moment, only the ticking of the antique clock filled the silence of the office. "The Horizon Project was too revolutionary for its time," he finally spoke. "Anthony was a dreamer, an idealist. He didn't understand the realities of the market, the necessary compromises." "The necessary compromises?" Sarah interrupted. "Like bribing public officials to cancel licenses, like spreading false rumors to scare away investors." Edward turned abruptly. "How did you—" "I have everything documented, Dad," she replied, pointing to the papers on the desk. "Every move you made to destroy the project, every manipulation to force Mom to marry you." "I loved her," Edward said softly, his voice losing its usual strength. "I still love her. Everything I did was to build a better, safer life." A life based on lies, Sarah completed. And now, Luke is using those same lies against our family. Edward quickly returned to his desk, his eyes examining the documents more closely. What do you know about Luke's plans? I know enough, she answered vaguely, following Isabella's instructions about not revealing everything she knew. And I know that you're about to lose much more than Anthony lost in the past. Is that why you're going to Geneva? Edward asked, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. To help Luke in his revenge? I'm going to Geneva because I need to know the whole truth, Sarah replied, standing up. And because, unlike you, I believe that some things need to come to light. She walked to the door but stopped before leaving. Oh, and Dad, you might want to review your files on the Horizon project. Something tells me you're going to need them soon. As she crossed the hallway, Sarah could feel her father's gaze on her back. She knew he was now in panic, probably already picking up the phone to make calls, trying to figure out exactly what she knew and what was about to happen. In the garden, Marcella was waiting for her, sitting on her favorite bench near the rose bushes. How did it go? She asked as Sarah approached. Exactly as we expected, Sarah replied, sitting next to her mother. He's scared, but he still doesn't know everything. Marcella took her daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. Are you sure you want to go through with this? There's still time to back out. Sarah looked at the imposing mansion, thinking of all the lies and manipulations those walls had witnessed over the years. No, Mom. There's no turning back. It's time for the whole truth to come out. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Isabella. Tickets confirmed. Anthony just spoke with the investors in Geneva. Everything ready for Wednesday. Sarah replied quickly. My father is exactly where we wanted him. He started making calls. Perfect, Isabella responded. Luke just confirmed his presence at the meeting too. All the pieces are moving. Marcella watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. You're much stronger than I was at your age, she commented softly. No, Mum, Sarah replied, hugging her. You were strong in your own way. You did what you had to do to protect the people you loved. Now it's my turn to fix things. From the office, they could hear Edward's altered voice on the phone. The panic was beginning to spread, exactly as Anthony had predicted. In 48 hours, Sarah would be in Geneva, ready to participate in the meeting that would change the fate of two families forever. But as she watched the frantic movement, through her father's office windows, Sarah couldn't help but feel a shiver of apprehension. Luke was astute, her father was powerful, and there were still many variables that could go wrong. The only certainty she had was that after Wednesday, nothing would be the same. The meeting room at Helvetia Bank shimmered under the morning light that streamed through the huge windows. The polished mahogany table reflected the faces of those present like a dark mirror, each carrying the weight of secrets about to be revealed. Sarah, seated between Luke and her father, felt the air heavy with tension. Ladies and gentlemen, Luke began, rising with the characteristic confidence that now seemed almost predatory to Sarah's eyes. We are here to announce not just a business merger, but a revolution in the market. The gathered investors, a carefully selected mix, the only way to access crucial information. Sarah felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. So I was used. As bait, without my knowledge or consent. Anthony tried to protect you, Isabella argued, her voice softening. He tried to warn your mother several times over the past few months, but Edward intercepted all attempts at communication. When it became clear that Luke was planning to use you to get to your father, Anthony realized he needed to act quickly. The waiter returned with their drinks, providing a moment's pause in the tense conversation. Sarah took advantage to organize her thoughts, taking a sip of the hot coffee. What exactly is Luke planning? She finally asked. Isabella pulled another document from her folder. He has created a complex structure of shell companies. When the wedding happened and the merger between Anderson and Siqueira companies was completed, he would use these companies to drain the project's resources. Your father would lose everything, just as Anthony lost in the past. And you have proof of this? I have enough evidence to start a serious investigation, Isabella confirmed, but we need more, and that's where you come in. Sarah raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Luke still doesn't know he's been discovered. He believes his plan is working perfectly, that he succeeded in humiliating you and that now he can proceed with the next phase of his revenge. But if you... Isabella paused significantly. If you pretend you want a reconciliation, we could access information we still lack. You want me to pretend I forgive him? Sarah asked incredulously. After everything he did? I want you to do to him what he did to you, Isabella replied directly. Use his ego against himself. Luke believes he's untouchable, that no one can outdo him at his own game. That's his biggest weakness. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind working quickly. It was an audacious proposal, potentially dangerous, but it also offered a chance for revenge she hadn't considered possible. And my father, she asked, how does he fit into all this? Edward Anderson is not innocent in this story, Isabella replied cautiously. His actions in the past triggered much of what's happening now. But if we don't act quickly, Luke will. Destroy not just your father, but the entire legacy that your mother and Anthony tried to build with the original Horizon project. Sarah's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Luke. Her heart raced as she read, I miss you, can we talk? I have a lot to explain. Isabella observed Sarah's reaction. He's already making his move. The question is, are you ready to make yours? Sarah reread Luke's message, then looked again at the documents spread out on the table. Years of lies, manipulations, and betrayals had led to this moment. Her mother had been forced to give up her love to protect Anthony. Her father had used his power to destroy dreams. Luke had turned everything into an elaborate revenge plan. What exactly do you need me to do? Sarah finally asked, her voice firm and determined. A small smile appeared on Isabella's lips as she opened her laptop. First, we need to establish your new public identity, the woman devastated by betrayal who, after reflection, decides to give love a second chance. It will be a delicate performance. We need it to be convincing not just for Luke, but for all the media following the case. And then? Then, Isabella quickly typed a password, opening a folder of encrypted files. We start the real operation. Anthony is organizing a secret meeting in Geneva next week. We need you to be there, but Luke can't suspect anything until the right moment. Sarah picked up her cell phone and began typing a response to Luke. I miss you too. Maybe we could have dinner and talk. When she raised her eyes from the phone, she found Isabella observing her with approval. Very good, the investigator commented. Now let's establish some basic rules for secure communication. From now on, every word, every gesture, every encounter needs to be carefully planned. Outside the cafe, the city continued its frantic pace, oblivious to the fact that at that discreet table, an unexpected alliance was being formed. An alliance that could not only expose long-buried truths, but also redefine the fate of two of the country's most powerful families. The Le Fleury restaurant, with its stunning view of Lake Geneva, was the kind of place Luke loved, exclusive, elegant and above all discreet. Sarah adjusted the midnight blue dress she had chosen, especially for the occasion, aware that every detail of her appearance needed to convey exactly the right message, vulnerability mixed with hope. "You look absolutely stunning," Luke commented as he pulled out the chair for her. His tailored Italian tuxedo and calculated smile composed the image of the successful businessman he tried so hard to project. "The place is wonderful," Sarah replied, allowing her eyes to roam the environment with genuine admiration. The city lights reflected on the lake waters, creating an almost magical setting. A sommelier approached with the wine list, and Luke, as always, made a point of demonstrating his enological knowledge. While he discussed the nuances of different vintages with the professional, Sarah discreetly checked her cell phone under the table. A message from Isabella flashed on the screen. "Operation initiated. Keep him busy." "Something important?" Luke asked, noticing her movement. "Just Mom," Sarah smiled, putting the phone away. She's still worried about this trip. "Understandable," Luke replied, his gaze studying her intensely. "Your mother has always been protective." The wine was served, a local chasselas, typical of the region. Sarah watched Luke swirl the glass, analyzing the color of the golden liquid against the light. There was something almost hypnotic about his movements, a natural elegance that made it easy to understand how so many people fell for his manipulations. "How was your meeting today?" she asked casually, following the script they had planned. "Productive," he answered vaguely. "But I don't want to talk about business now. Tonight is about us, about new beginnings." The waiter arrived to take their orders. Luke chose the lamb fillet, while Sarah opted for the fish of the day. When they were alone again, he leaned forward, his eyes fixed on hers. "You know, Sarah, I've always admired your intelligence. It's one of the things that attracted me to you from the beginning." She took a small sip of wine, using the moment to compose herself. "Even when you were planning to use me as an instrument of revenge?" Luke showed no surprise at the direct question. On the contrary, a small smile appeared on his lips. Revenge was just the beginning, but something changed along the way. "What changed?" she asked, keeping her voice soft, almost vulnerable. "You," he replied, reaching out to touch her fingers on the table. "You changed everything. At first it was simple. Use our relationship to get to your father, but then..." A new message vibrated on Sarah's cell phone. She ignored it, keeping her attention on Luke, who continued. "Then I realized I had found someone who truly understood me. Someone who, like me, lived trapped by the expectations and manipulations of a powerful family." The first course arrived, an appetizer of grilled scallops with asparagus. Sarah watched Luke cut the scallop with surgical precision, each movement controlled and elegant. "Is that why you orchestrated that spectacle at the event?" she asked, allowing a touch of bitterness to escape in her voice. "To free me from family expectations?" "It was a mistake," Luke admitted, his voice assuming a tone of apparent regret. "I let the desire for revenge against your father cloud my judgment. But now I can offer something better, a true partnership. Together, we can create something much greater than anything your father or my father ever dreamed." "Hov?" Sarah felt her cell phone vibrate again. This time Luke noticed. "You should check," he suggested. "It might be important." With an apology, she checked the messages. The first was from Isabella. "We need 30 more minutes." The second, to her surprise, was from her father. "Arrived in Geneva. We need to talk. Urgent." "Any problem?" Luke asked, studying her reaction. "No," she smiled, putting the phone away. "Just Mom again. She's always been anxious." Luke nodded, but something in his gaze suggested he didn't quite believe it. The main course arrived, providing a welcome pause in the conversation. "Tomorrow," Luke began after a few moments, "I have an important meeting at the bank. I'd like you to accompany me." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her heart had accelerated. "A business meeting. I don't know if it would be appropriate." "It would be more than appropriate," he insisted. "In fact, your presence is crucial." "Why?" Luke took a sip of wine before answering. "Because what I'm going to present tomorrow will change everything, and I want you to be part of it." A final message arrived on Sarah's cell phone. "Operation completed. You won't believe what we found." "What do you think?" Luke asked, his intense eyes fixed on her. "Will you accompany me tomorrow?" Sarah allowed a small smile to appear on her lips. "Of course," she answered. "I can't wait to see what you've planned." The rest of the dinner passed between seemingly casual conversations and moments of silence loaded with meaning. When they finally said goodnight in the hotel corridor, Luke leaned in as if to kiss her, but Sarah skillfully turned the movement into a hug. "Good night, Luke," she whispered. "See you tomorrow." As soon as she entered her suite, Sarah sent a coded message to Isabella. "The bird is ready to fly. Destination confirmed for Tuesday." The response came almost instantly. "Excellent. Meeting in 30 minutes at the agreed location. Anthony and Helena need to see this too. What we found changes everything." Sarah quickly changed clothes, opting for something discreet and comfortable. While grabbing her purse, her cell phone vibrated with one last message, this time from her father. "Daughter, don't trust anyone. There's more at stake than you imagine. Meet me before the meeting tomorrow. Please." With a deep sigh, Sarah put away the phone. In less than 24 hours, all the secrets would come to light. But first, She needed to find out exactly what Isabella's team had found on Luke's laptop, and why her father seemed so desperate to talk to her. The small cafe in the basement of the Hotel des Bergues was buzzing with tension when Sarah arrived. Anthony, Helena, and Isabella were already gathered at a secluded table, their faces illuminated by the bluish light of an open laptop. The place was practically empty at that hour of the night, except for a sleepy bartender and a couple of tourists absorbed in their own conversation. "What did you find?" Sarah asked as soon as she sat down, noticing the grave expression on Anthony's face. Isabella turned the laptop toward her. "It wasn't just the Horizon project that Luke was trying to recover," she explained, opening a series of files. "He created a much more complex structure than we imagined." On the screen, dozens of documents detailed an intricate network of companies, contracts, and financial transactions. Sarah, with her training in finance, began to identify disturbing patterns. "This isn't possible," she murmured, her eyes quickly scanning the numbers. "These companies, some have existed for over 15 years. "Exactly," Helena intervened, her voice carrying a tone of reluctant admiration. "Luke didn't start this plan when he met you. He's been preparing this since he was practically a teenager." Anthony leaned forward, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. "My son has always been brilliant, but this goes beyond anything I could have imagined." "His plan wasn't just to get revenge on your father," Isabella explained, opening more files. "Luke created a parallel structure within the Anderson Empire itself. Every investment Edward made in recent years, every important acquisition, Luke had a hidden stake." "How is that possible?" Sarah asked, feeling her head spin with the implications. "Dad is meticulous with his business." Helena let out a humorless laugh. "Edward has always been too arrogant to notice when he was being manipulated. Luke used that arrogance against him, just as your father did with me and Anthony in the past." A waiter approached to take their orders. Everyone opted for coffee. It would be a long night. "But there's more," Isabella continued after the waiter walked away. "We found correspondence between Luke and your mother." Sarah felt her heart stop for a moment. "Mum? But—" Anthony took an envelope from his folder and handed it to Sarah. Inside were a series of printed emails exchanged over the past 2 years between Luke and Madeline. "Your mother never got over what Edward did," Anthony explained softly. "She has been feeding Luke information about your father's business all this time." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the emails. The language was coded, casual at first, glance but loaded with meaning for those who knew how to interpret it. Madeleine had been much more than a source of information. She had been an active ally in Luke's plan. "Why did she never tell me?" Sarah whispered, more to herself than to the others. "To protect you," Helena answered. "Madeleine knew that the less you knew, the more convincing your reaction would be when everything came to light. But now, we need to recalculate our strategy." Isabella intervened, opening a new file on the laptop. "Because what Luke is planning for tomorrow is even more audacious than we imagined." On the screen, a document detailed what appeared to be a merger proposal. But as Sarah began to read the details, she realized it was much more than that. "He's going to announce the merger of the companies tomorrow," she understood. "But it won't be a real merger. It will be a hostile takeover," Anthony completed. "The moment Edward signs the papers, thinking he's consolidating an alliance through your marriage, he'll actually be handing over control of everything." "And the investors?" Sarah asked. "The ones you managed to bring back from the original project?" Helena smiled, a smile that resembled a predator about to attack. "They are part of Luke's plan. He knew Anthony would try to reunite them. In fact, he was counting on it." Sarah's cell phone vibrated. It was another message from her father. "Daughter, please, it's urgent. I'm at the bar in your hotel." "Edward is here," she informed the others, showing the message. "Go," Isabella said after exchanging looks with Anthony and Helena. "But don't reveal anything we've discovered. We need to know what he knows." Sarah stood up, but Anthony gently held her arm. "Be careful," he warned. "Your father is like a cornered animal now, and cornered animals can be dangerous." The walk back to the hotel seemed longer than normal. Sarah's mind was buzzing with all the new information. Her mother, whom she thought had been just a victim of circumstances, had been an active participant in Luke's revenge. The plan was much bigger and older than any of them had imagined. In the elevator, Sarah received another message, this time from an unknown number. "Ms. Anderson, this is Martin Weber from the Swiss National Bank. We need to talk before tomorrow's meeting. It's about some irregularities we detected in Mr. Sikera's accounts." The plot was getting even more complicated. When the elevator doors opened in the lobby, Sarah spotted her father sitting at the bar, an untouched glass of whiskey in front of him. For the first time in her life, Edward Anderson looked old and tired. "Dad," she called softly, sitting down beside him. Edward turned to her, his eyes laden with an emotion she had never seen before. Fear. "Sarah," he began, his voice hoarse, "there's something you need to know. Something about your mother, and about what really happened 20 years ago." The hotel bar was almost empty at that hour of the night. The soft light from the Art Deco lamps cast dancing shadows on Edward Anderson's face, accentuating the lines of worry that seemed to have deepened in recent days. Sarah watched her father twirl the untouched glass of whiskey between his fingers, a nervous gesture she had never seen in him before. "Your mother," Edward began, his voice lower and more vulnerable than Sarah had ever heard, "wasn't forced to marry me as you might think." Sarah remained silent, allowing her father to continue. Each new revelation tonight seemed to completely change her understanding of the past. "The Horizon Project," he continued, finally taking a sip of whiskey, "wasn't just a real estate venture. It was a front for something much bigger." "What kind of front?" Sarah asked softly, though her heart was racing. Edward looked around, making sure no one was close enough to hear. "Anthony and your mother weren't just developing a sustainable real estate project. They discovered something during the land surveys, something that could change the balance of power in the entire city." "What are you talking about, Dad?" "Natural resources," he answered, his voice almost a whisper. The location where they planned to build, they had discovered significant reserves of high-quality mineral water, the kind of discovery that could generate millions in exploitation contracts. Sarah felt her breathing quicken. "And you sabotaged the project to take control of this discovery?" "No," Edward replied, surprising her. "I intervened to prevent the discovery from coming to light, because if that happened..." He paused, taking another sip of whiskey. "Your mother and Anthony would have been eliminated by people much more dangerous than me." "What people?" "There were powerful interests involved, people who already controlled the mineral water market in the region and didn't want competition. When I discovered their plans to deal with the only way to protect the people we love is to let them hate us." As she walked towards Isabella, Sarah realized that tomorrow's meeting would be much more than a confrontation between rival families. It was a convergence point where decades of secrets, lies, and manipulations would finally collide. And at the center of it all was her, carrying the weight of truths that could either save or destroy everyone involved. The meeting room at Helvetia Bank gleamed under the morning light streaming through the enormous windows. The polished mahogany table reflected the faces of those present like a dark mirror, each carrying the weight of secrets about to be revealed. Sarah, seated between Luke and her father, felt the air heavy with tension. "Ladies and gentlemen," Luke began, rising with the characteristic confidence that now seemed almost predatory to Sarah's eyes. "We are here to announce not just a business merger, but a revolution in the market." The gathered investors, a carefully selected mix of familiar faces and new players, watched attentively. Helena Vasconcelos, seated near the window, maintained her carefully neutral expression. Anthony, strategically positioned at the other end of the table, studied every movement of his son. "Project Horizon," Luke continued, activating a presentation on the big screen, was not just an idealistic dream of sustainable development. It was the key to something much bigger. Sarah observed her father tensing in his chair. Edward Anderson, the man who always seemed invincible, now appeared to be carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. During the initial research, Luke went on, significant reserves of high-quality mineral water were discovered, a discovery that was conveniently hidden by certain interests. The door to the room opened silently, and Margaret entered, her presence causing a ripple of surprise among those present. She wasn't on the program. She shouldn't be there. But her determined look said that her presence was not accidental. "Luke," she interrupted, her voice clear and firm, "I think it's time to tell the whole truth." Luke stopped his presentation, a shadow of uncertainty crossing his face for the first time. "Margaret, I don't think this is the moment." "It's exactly the moment," she insisted, walking to the center of the room, "because what you're about to reveal is not the complete story." Sarah felt her phone vibrate, a message from Isabella. "Martin Weber has been detained. He was an imposter working for the water cartel. We're safe now." "The truth," Margaret continued, pulling a folder from her purse, "is that the water reserves were not hidden just out of greed or power. They were protected to prevent an environmental disaster." The room fell into complete silence. Edward slowly stood up, his eyes fixed on his wife. "Margaret, the original studies," she continued, distributing documents across the table, "showed that exploiting these reserves could compromise the entire aquifer system of the region. Anthony and I discovered this in the final stages of research. That's why Edward intervened." Luke picked up one of the documents, his eyes quickly scanning the information. "But the reports I have were altered," Anthony completed, finally breaking his silence, "by those who wanted to exploit the reserves at any cost. The same ones who tried to eliminate us when we discovered the truth." Helena Vasconcelos stood up, her posture emanating authority. "As a representative of the original investors, I can confirm, we backed out of the project not because of pressure or manipulation, but because we understood the environmental risks involved." Sarah watched the scene unfold, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. Her father hadn't been a villain trying to steal the project. He had acted to protect not only her mother and Anthony, but also the environment from an irreversible disaster. "So all this time," Luke began, his voice losing its usual confidence. "All this time," Margaret completed, "I allowed you to think you were uncovering buried secrets, when in fact I was guiding you away from a real danger. The emails, the information I leaked, it was all part of a plan to keep you safe." Edward walked to his wife, taking her hand for the first time in years, with a gesture of genuine affection. "We never stopped being a team, even when it seemed we were on opposite sides." Anthony stood up, approaching his son. "Luke, you're brilliant. You've built an impressive empire on your own merits. You don't need revenge or elaborate schemes to prove your worth." The room plunged into a deep silence as Luke absorbed all the revelations. His meticulous plan of revenge, built over years, was crumbling, not by the force of his enemies, but by the weight of the truth. Sarah stood up, her clear voice cutting through the silence. "Maybe it's time to transform all this energy into something constructive. The original Project Horizon was revolutionary in terms of sustainability. Why not update it for today, using all the expertise Luke has developed?" Helena smiled, nodding in approval. "The original investors would be very interested in such a proposal. Sustainable development is even more relevant today than it was 20 years ago. A real partnership," Anthony suggested, looking at Edward, "without manipulations or hidden agendas this time." Luke remained silent for a long moment, his eyes scanning the faces around him. His father, who never stopped believing in his potential. Margaret, who protected him even when he thought he was fighting against her. Edward, who sacrificed his own reputation to protect something greater than all of them. And finally, Sarah, who had demonstrated a strength and intelligence he had never truly appreciated before. "Perhaps," he finally spoke, a different smile appearing on his face, no longer calculating or manipulative, but genuinely reflective, "it's time to build something new. Something that honors the original dream, but looking to the future." Margaret smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Sometimes we need to lose something precious to find something even more valuable." The tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by a different energy, no longer of confrontation and revenge, but of possibilities and renewal. The investors began to discuss animatedly among themselves, already envisioning the potential of a renewed Project Horizon. Sarah watched, her parents approach Anthony, decades of misunderstandings and resentments beginning to dissolve in an honest and open conversation. Luke remained in his place, still processing how his plans for revenge had transformed into an opportunity for redemption. "You know," she said, approaching him, "sometimes the universe has a funny way of turning our worst intentions into our best moments." Luke looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time. "You always knew, didn't you? From the beginning, you were several steps ahead." "Let's say I learned from the best," she smiled. "Both from you and from our parents. The difference is that I chose to use that knowledge to build bridges instead of walls." Outside the bank's windows, Geneva continued its normal pace, oblivious to the drama that had just unfolded in that room. But for those people, nothing would be the same. Old resentments had been replaced by new possibilities, revenge had given way to redemption, and the future, for the first time in a long time, seemed to shine with the promise of something truly extraordinary. Dear listeners, we hope this journey through the secrets, revelations, and redemptions of the Anderson and Sinclair families has touched your hearts. For more engaging stories like this, exploring the complexities of family relationships and the power of truth, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Leave in the comments which city you're watching us from and share your own stories of redemption and new beginnings. Each week, we bring new narratives that make us reflect on the power of forgiveness and the importance of truth. Until next time.